Hello everyone, welcome. I'm the Cotswolds Girl and welcome to my video for this week. I hope you have enjoyed my last videos. If you have, please like, share, subscribe, send it out to the masses. I'm really trying to grow the channel, so that would be fantastic. But in this one I've got something a little bit different for you, and I hope you find it interesting because it's a topic that I really am interested in, and it's a really fascinating thing. I think I've spoken before about how I'm really into history, and I'm surrounded by all of my history things, but these particular things are actually a big thing for me. So I'm keen to put it out there because I've been pondering a few things over the last sort of couple of weeks or so, including I guess, how do you say it, sort of not questioning my faith, but more asking sort of a few more questions just in relation to what happened before. Do we take everything that we are told as, the letter of the law, or, are there different perspectives? And if so, what are they? And, all of these different things. And part of this has sort of led me down a couple of rabbit holes this week, and I just sort of wanted to share them with you because, again, I find it really fascinating. So my blog this week is called What If? And what I've been doing is pondering the thought of an alternate history. So the first one that I was sort of considering, again, having sort of thought about, my faith and, what I do believe in, and, what's sort of been fed to me throughout my entire life, because obviously I was a churchgoer right up until, my late teenage years. Even at school, we had we used to have chapel, and we used to have religious ed classes and all this sort of thing. And so and then obviously I'm very interested in, the sort of spirituality side of things. So, I've sort of been exploring that a little bit further as well. And there's a spiritualist church that I've gone to a couple of times in a village just across from me. And what it really did was challenge, because I guess what I've always been brought up with is an either or scenario. It's either you're this or you're that. And I'm like, well, that's sort of been challenged a little bit this week, and over the past couple of weeks, having gone to this new worship group. And they're very much, they'll go and have a medium talk, but then to begin with, you'll sing the Lord's Prayer, and it's like, okay, well, this is very different. This is challenging a lot of what I was brought up with. So anyway, that's the pretext to it. So what I thought about this week was an alternative history. What if? And I've started reading this book here by Catherine Nixie. It's called Heresy, as you can probably see, and it basically challenges what you think of as the norm. And what it sort of says is that, there's a, if we all believe that there's a higher power, that there's a God, then, all of his, his other messengers, be it Prophet Muhammad, or be it Jesus Christ, or whatever and what forth, how does that all tie in? And, it's a very interesting read. If you haven't read it, do read it. And my first thought was, okay, well, what if, Christianity wasn't the original faith? Like, the world didn't, there wasn't a big bang and then all of a sudden everyone's a Christian. So it was one of, many sort of religions, and, I guess where, at dot BC or, dot AD, and then history from there. So, so after the birth of Christ and so forth. It took probably a couple of centuries for, the Bible even to be formed. And it was a really thought-provoking process, and I thought, well, what if Christianity didn't take off? Like, what if it wasn't, the faith? Like, and when I say Christianity, I'm including all forms of Christianity. So, it's Catholicism and your Anglicanism and, Lutheranism and all of these sorts of things. But what if it didn't take off? What if it was still one of, like a sectarian kind of faith? What then? Just imagine not having, and again, other religious faiths and whatnot, don't necessarily celebrate all of the things that Christians do celebrate, like Christmas and Easter and all of that. But imagine if that wasn't what was a mainstream thing. Like, just imagine if that hadn't been a thing. What would society be like today? And it got me thinking, a lot of these other things, if that hadn't been the case, then, what would form the basis of, our everyday? It's really quite an interesting thought. And then another thought occurred to me, going down this sort of theme. What if, just say that the War of the Roses never happened? Just an alternative history. So, full disclosure, I am actually fully descended from Edward III. So King Edward III, Plantagenet, I'm descended from it. I've gone back. He's my 22nd great-grandfather. So having gone on that journey and sort of started doing my history and finding out all about Edward III and all of these sorts of things, really the War of the Roses started after now Edward III had, numerous children. He had, I think it was five boys and, a couple of girls, and so a big family tree. His firstborn son, which was Edward the Black Prince, he died early, and so his young son, Richard II, then inherited the crown, and he was only a boy when he inherited the crown. My original thought was, okay, well, what if the Black Prince hadn't died young? He'd reigned for 40, 50 years, and then Richard II inherited the throne at age 30, for example. How different would our history look? How different would the royal family look? How different would my family look if that had been the case? And I thought, right, okay, I'm going to just sit and ponder this a little bit, because obviously when Richard III inherited the throne as a child, there were, sort of a series of things that didn't go quite right. There were, a few things that did go well, but ultimately, when he was the king, he put an act through and designated that the line would pass to the sons of Lionel of Antwerp, which is where my line comes in. And it wasn't going to go to the descendants of John of Gaunt. Now, Lionel of Antwerp was the second surviving, or survived to adulthood, son of Edward III. John of Gaunt, who was the Lancaster line, he was the fourth. So they weren't, the Lancaster line was not the priority claim. That was only the fourth. That was only the fourth son. So if the line had passed through John of Gaunt, through Lionel of Antwerp, who was the third son, and whose sons ended up becoming the Earl of March and then the York line, that's, would the War of the Roses actually been a thing. Because, as I said, the War of the Roses, effectively another name for it was the Cousins' War, was because the Yorkists, rightly, in my opinion, were the proper descendants. Whereas Henry Bolingbroke, who was part of the John of Gaunt lineage, basically overthrew Richard II and inherited the crown, and he ended up becoming Henry IV, which wasn't what was designated. So it's a very interesting thing to think that if, for example, the Black Prince had lived and Richard II had inherited the crown at a more mature age, he would have had time to then build up his forces. He would never have necessarily been overthrown by his cousin, and then the line would have passed, if he hadn't married, would have passed down to the York line anyway. So imagine how things would be different if we didn't have the War of the Roses. For a start, and here's one that will blow your mind, we wouldn't have had a Tudor dynasty, potentially. The Tudors wouldn't have been a thing. Imagine not having Henry VIII or Queen Elizabeth. You know, just imagine what that would have looked like and how that would have shaped things. If it hadn't been the Tudors, then the Stuarts would have never reigned, because they potentially would have had children going down that line. So we would never have had a Stuart dynasty. So it's a really, really interesting thought. Just imagine if that had happened, how things would be different today. And again, it's a rabbit hole that you can literally jump down, and it's something that really, really interests me. And to be honest, I'm going to explore a lot of this further, but I just sort of wanted to get the creative juices flowing a little bit and just ponder these things, because again, I think we take for granted what history was and the way that it all turned out, but it could have been so different. Could have been absolutely unrecognisable. If things had been slightly different, you know, if you know, just a twist of fate had never happened. Again, another one. Just imagine if there was no anarchy and there wasn't the wars between King Stephen and Empress Matilda. You know, if the White Ship had never sunk, that would never have been a thing. Just turn of events can literally spin history in a moment, and in my mind it's very interesting to try and unpick that and think what would have happened, knowing, I guess, the personalities of the different people, and sort of trying to unpick how that would have resolved itself. But I just wanted to sort of come on and I guess introduce this sort of new sort of topic of thought that I'm sort of going down. Again, it really interests me, and as I've said a number of times on this channel, I've had, you know, I go to a lot of history festivals. I'm very, very intrigued in English history, and I'm going to sort of go down again this rabbit hole a number of different times, because again, there's so many things. Imagine if the Titanic hadn't sunk, or imagine if JFK had lived. Or imagine if Malcolm X hadn't been executed. On all of these things, just imagine if that hadn't happened. There's just so many things that we could talk about. So anyway, that's just a little bit about that. Hope you're all having a really good Halloween. I've got my little assistant here, Broomhilda, who's keeping a watchful eye over me today. Yes, I hope you're all having a wonderful weekend. I know the weather's turned; it's just sort of a little bit yucky and a little bit blur. I'm actually going to see Helen Castor talk this weekend in Cirencester here. She's doing a talk as part of the History Festival on her book. So that will be really interesting as well. So I'll give you a little bit of feedback on that in my next video. But yeah, look, stay safe. Hope you're having a wonderful time. I know it's getting cold. I know it's getting dark. It's a little bit miserable. But look, you know, again, we've all got our outlets. Make sure you're looking after yourself. Make sure you're keeping hydrated, keeping well, eating well, and you know, we are a community here. You know, I'm trying to sort of put out some content that might be interesting to people. I'm very much engaged, so drop me a message. You know, I'm more than happy to write back and start a conversation. because I think that, you know, that's the wonderful thing about putting content out these days, is that you can engage with people from across the globe on stuff that's really, really interesting. And, you know, we're as I said, we're all in this together. So have a wonderful weekend. Hope you're all spectacularly well. Keep safe and have a wonderful Halloween. Woo!